Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Mental Health Association panel for youth and mental health. I'm super pleased to have Justin Lessard with Youth Empowerment and Support Services here today, and Sarah Chan with Alberta Mentoring Partnership. We just wanted to start this webinar by asking all of our participants to just drop a line in the chat and let us know where you're from and where you're listening from today. While you're doing that, just you may also at any point drop a question in our Q&A in this webinar, and we will answer it at the end when we have a little bit of time. So I'm just going to open the chat here. We have Prosper Place here. Prosper Place is a program within the Canadian Mental Health Association, and our members are watching in. And Edmonton Yes is here. Awesome. Hello, Katie. Perfect. Awesome. Well, we can get started as you continue to let us know where you're from. Hello, everyone. Awesome. That's coming in now. Perfect. So I will pass it over to, why don't we start with Sarah, and to share your experience and what you have going on in youth and mental health right now.
Thanks. It's great to see all the friends in the chat. Thanks for tuning in, and it's great to see you virtually. I guess a little bit of background, hey Alex, why I was invited, I think, because Alex asked me to participate on this panel. And I think it's because of my over 20 years of experience being a teacher. So I just met Justin, and he has a teaching background as well. I wasn't in the school system teacher. I still am a music teacher. So by trade, I'm a classical pianist, so I'm an artist. And I've been teaching and running my own studio forever. Alongside that, so, working with youths of all ages for many years, I also took a special interest in working with youth in the social sector and the charitable sector. So much of my community work and social advocacy has been around working with youth, and that's youth from all walks of life. Currently, I'm the founder and ambassador for Make Your Mark, which is United Way's youth activation when United Way is here. But on my other life, I am the community engagement girl at Alberta Mentoring Partnership. And we work very closely with over 200 agencies in Alberta that have formal mentoring programs, also informal mentoring programs, and we're resourcing these outfits to ensure that they have everything they need to be successful in running their mentorship programs, and also bringing them into a network so that we can learn from each other, because it's very upstream and it's a very holistic approach, but with a proper community and with mentorship, either it be formal or informal in your, your schools and your neighborhoods that you live in, or your family networks, your friend networks, having the appropriate mentorship in place, I actually think it's the difference between saving a life or not. So yeah, it's great to work in the mentorship space with my colleague Al, who's also here. And yeah, excited to talk about all the things that are happening to our young people. Justin.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Justin Lessard. I go he, him pronouns. I am one of two youth trauma therapists at Yes Edmonton. So it's Youth Empowerment and Supportive Services. I've been doing that for about half a year now. Before that, I was a high school social studies teacher. And so a big reason I think we've been invited to this panel is that I work with a lot of transient youth, unhoused youth who are struggling with either houselessness or addiction or severe mental health issues, and just trying to take like that mental health, mental illness component and like bringing that to the table and addressing that in a honest and forward way. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm on mute. Thank you so much for the introductions. If you would like to share sort of where you see the happenings right now in our youth and mental health, what's going on and what can we improve on to help better our actions or our thought process to help where we can.
When it comes from like my background, a lot of it would be a lot more awareness, understanding of what mental health and mental illness is. I think we have a lot of really good understanding of what that terminology is. We know what anxiety, depression, we have a pretty like loose understanding of various mental illness and personality disorders and things like that. But when it comes to like the practical component of how we adapt or change or become more inclusive to these things, we're really, really, really far behind. So when youth talk about being depressed or anxious, you know, when we talk about even like from the school system, it's kind of like, oh, you're depressed. I'm really sorry that you're depressed, but you have to write this test anyway. And so when it comes to like how we have conversations about mental health, how we have conversations around mental illness, we're very, very far behind in how we change how we function and change how we do things in order to be more inclusive to these things and more open about how we work with these individuals and not against them. And so one of my favorite quotes is that we're really good at trying to make kids fit into our institutions, but we're not really good at making our institutions fit kids.
Yeah, I would totally agree, Justin. The related but unrelated. I was at a different thing last week and we were talking about, it was at a youth mentoring symposium, and they were presenting research on young women of color in high school settings in the States. So these were American researchers. But even though I had never even considered myself a woman of color until like last year, a friend of mine who works in the EDI space said, no, actually, you're a woman of color. And I thought, oh my gosh, I suppose I am, just different melanin. And they were talking about school experiences and how these structures don't fit these young women. And I didn't realize to what extent, because I'm a model minority, I had assimilated so quickly. And I come from a background where achievement and compliance are heralded as, very good things and things that good girls want to do. And I don't think you have to be a woman of color to experience that. But, when you're housed and when you have no food security issues by and large, and, even when all of the structural things are in place, you don't realize how the institutions really swallow you up. And even if you're kind of participating and actually learning how to excel within those structures, they're still rather damaging, because then even as a like not super traumatized, unhoused youth, you realize like, oh, I never stopped to question like my background or my identity. It was just my role to comply and to fit in.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of these youth are at, right? Where they have to, it's not about necessarily like what's growth like, it's like what is compliance for them. I have to comply because that's how I get into this place. That's how I get into it. It's how I stay in the shelter. It's how I maintain these programs. And so when we're looking at like how we work with a lot of youth, and that's school systems as well as a lot of these various institutions, it turns into we're pushing for compliance over growth a lot of the time. Fit this mold or else kind of thing. So I really like that point you made.
Well, it's a lot of fear too, right? Because as teachers, you have certain metrics that you have to demonstrate that you have, achieved in order to demonstrate your own effectiveness at your role. And then the school itself, has metrics it has to meet, or else or else, pretty much.
Yeah.
And then the youth have all of these metrics that they have to also present and demonstrate, or else. And I think past a certain point, if you're a youth that's struggling, and I actually think all youth struggle, but you know, if we're talking about the youth that really struggle to even maintain any sort of security, then the more or else situations you find yourself in, the more you actually become pretty numb to it, and you start not caring, because you realize that the system is, you're already losing, and it's like, how do you even win, right? And so there is no win. And so you see a lot of youth, sadly, because they're not being supported in the right ways, not in all cases, but the youth that are just kind of dropping off the map, they've given up. And it's you know, I love that we're talking about mental health in the community. The kids are talking about it way more than we would have when I was young. But a lot of it is like, don't forget to ask for help, you know, and self-care. Those are all good things. Yes, you should ask for help. Yes, self-care is important. Yes, self-compassion is important. Absolutely correct. But if you're a youth, you may or may not have the capacity to access those tools for yourselves. And it's like someone who, I remember a teacher once asked me, like, are you stupid? And I remember thinking, like, maybe, I don't know. But then in my mind, I'm like, maybe you're stupid, because you didn't actually tell me what I did. You didn't tell me how to fix it. You're just angry at me. And I remember being really angry. It was a music teacher. So what I did is I just played the thing like 15 sort of different ways, interchanging permutations and combinations of things until this person was less angry at me. And they were just super angry anyways, because I think they hated themselves, actually. But with the youth, they need to, like, a youth that is in severe distress isn't necessarily going to come out and say, like, hey, I need help with this specific thing. And I have like analyzed the situation to identify what's wrong. And these are the key pieces that I require assistance with. I think it's up to all of us as well to notice when someone's not doing well, because when someone's really not okay, they're not in a position to sound the alarm. So we have to be, it's up to us as a community to make sure we're watching out for each other and our youth.
Yeah. I think that's I like two of those points. I liked the whole, like, we don't care anymore. I like that as from a psychological perspective, like, what a great defense mechanism, right? Like, it's just like so easy to not care, because whatever happens to me is whatever. If I have to sleep in a dumpster one night, it's whatever. If I don't get fed today, whatever. If, you know, something bad happens to me, it's whatever. It's super easy to not care. You see it all the time in school systems too, where kids who are struggling in certain courses, they'll be like, well, I don't really care about that class anyway. Like, it's just like, whatever. And then I really like that part about when you're talking about adults and the expectations they put on kids. And it's not an expectation that's meetable or attainable for a youth. And especially I've had this conversation quite a bit about, you know, we need to eliminate how we talk about the expectations we put on at-risk youth, because our youth who are at risk, because they don't know. And if we don't teach them, if we don't show them, if we don't model, if we don't build skills, if we don't, you know, show them, you know, all these different things that they can do with their life, then they're going to go, so what's the point? Every other time I've asked for help or pushed for anything, I either get yelled at, chastised, or I get neglected. So why would I ask for help when I've already done that? And we put all this responsibility on kids when, like, their brains aren't even done developing, and like, they just don't know. And we as the adults in the room need to take more responsibility, but we seem to put more responsibility on these kids to be like, they have to be independent, they have to do this, they have to want it. And it's like, how are they going to want what they don't know? We have to show, we have to help, we have to support. The only expectation should be, how do we support? How do we care?
Well, and then going, before we popped into this, the webinar, Justin and I were chatting on the side, and we were talking about how upstream is upstream, you know, because it's like, well, how do we eliminate houseless youth? How do we make sure that all these youth complete their high school education at the very least, right? There's kids with bachelor's degrees. it's still not enough, right? How are these youth supposed to succeed without a tether up into the working world, that without knowing someone who knows someone who can give you your first job or who will take you on as an intern in a positive place with, positive influences.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things that need to happen. And also how far back in time do you go to make sure this child was able to live in their family unit, however diverse and colorful all of our family units are, I'm sure. Everyone's got something. But, how did we support that child's mother when she was pregnant? How did we support her to finish her education? It's just a cycle and a really big structure, and so many resources need to be put into motion to intervene in these young people's lives. So it's not just one thing or just one thing over here. It sadly needs to be many, ideally coordinated efforts from all different levels of these, frankly, quite problematic structures.
Yeah. Like I have had this conversation with a lot of youth workers at Yes, when something we have to discharge a kid for whatever reason, or we have to do we have to just do what we have to do to keep people safe. And that's the unfortunate part of it. And there's all this remorse, these adults are doing these awful things that they just have to do for safety. And the conversation that I have all the time with them is you cannot blame yourself for the failures of an institution. An individual cannot be blamed for the failures of a society and of a community. And we continue to push individual hoorah or individual means when this is a collective issue. Our communities are not taking care of our community. At the end of the day, that's kind of what it comes down to. I volunteered as well for a nonprofit organization called Boots on the Ground. And it's so alarming where I'm walking downtown and you're handing out safe use supplies and you turn around and there's Rogers Place. And it's just it's this weird dystopia of we have all of this stuff, but we just don't want to utilize it to help take care of people. We have it.
Well, I think this is veering away from youth and mental health and more about structures, but the way where resources come from, how people get those resources in order to have prosperity, who gets it, how they get it, where it's distributed, and whose responsibility it is. There's not always great alignment. I will say this, oftentimes, I know United Way runs this pretty well, actually Yes is involved too, All In for Youth, right? So it's a great model for a wraparound model of services to young people that works. And so that's excellent, but then getting the right partners on board to scale it up and everything, that's yet another challenge. And so collaboration is key, and it does work, but I guess work needs to be done to get more partners on board. We actually know what to do. Yeah. It's getting all the resources parked in the right place, yesterday.
Yeah. And I think that's where we can zigzag back, where it's when we look at how we handle things with youth, even a lot of it is underfunded. We don't want to acknowledge that we're not doing a great job with youth when it comes either to all of these institutions that we work with, or even when we go into education and how we deal with things like maternity and paternity leaves. How are we supporting those parents? It's kind of that whole cradle to grave system is just, it's just not there, and it's just not sufficient. And our kids are falling through the cracks.
Yep. When I used to talk to students, we called it the road show. Annette and I were just talking about it this morning. We talked about poverty just in our local region, because a lot of the fundraisers that the students would do for for causes would be to help alleviate the difficult circumstances of people globally. So, elephants, special case for elephant stuff, water for sure, orphans in Nicaragua, all sorts of things all over the world where people are having difficulty. And that is true. They are having difficulty, but I also brought to the attention of these young people, instead of spending so much money to travel halfway across the world to help someone, there's plenty to do right here. So you can get started right now. And we talked about the root causes, right? So housing, education, childcare, transportation, mental health, racism. And it's not just those 6, those were just categories that were easy to talk about, these systemic issues. And then so different orders of government and, you know, different agencies are working on different parts of it. And that's why I was talking about the collaboration part. Like everybody wants to solve their piece of the puzzle, and that's great. But also knowing how your piece of the puzzle fits in with everyone else without petty fighting, maybe?
Yeah. There's, I have like obviously like a big dream of like Edmonton being a like mental health community city. And there's one in, I can't remember if it's the Netherlands or what have you, where it is a well-known place where people with mental illness and things like that go, and they get supported and they can get housed by people within the community, and the community helps support those people to get access to these services. And so it's the community supporting the community, and it's not, you know, that's someone else's problem. It's this is our problem. This is our backyard, and we take care of each other. And I think we're slowly figuring that out. We're kind of getting back onto that whole we are a community, we take care of one another thing, but it's very slow.
And I forgot, okay, someone else is going to have to come in with the actual data here, but with every dollar, because it's expensive, right? Housing people is expensive, supporting our youth in all of these wraparound ways to multi-prong the situation, very expensive for sure. However, the price of not intervening is many times, I think it's staggering, the number, many times over the amount of resources that are required to, I don't know what we call it, like maintain or like manage.
Yeah, we'll say manage, but
manage things. It's more expensive.
Yeah.
So actually a great value when it comes to investing in our youth.
Yeah. And I think that's the term that is missed out a lot, is the investment in youth. I think we talk a lot about how, like, you know, we invest enough for youth, you know, but a lot of it's a pretty bare minimum. Like we're not really meeting that threshold of like what this actual investment looks like. And so when it comes to, you know, when we look at the mental health component, you know, what's the access for that? Many of these youth don't have access to counselors or psychologists or psychiatrists, and not because they're not there, but because it's just inaccessible.
Well, and there's barriers too. Like, how are you going to get there? How do you know where to go? Did your phone get stolen?
Yeah.
Can't look it up. It's funny, out of all the things that a youth will get fixed, they're really good at fixing their phones. Like, like all sorts of other things are falling through the cracks. But when it comes to making sure you've got your phone up and running, there you go. So.
But that's like a lifeline for them. You know, it's really interesting. I'm talking to some youth and they're like, hey, I have this Discord server. I'm talking to like 600 other youth right now. And they just have these like really cool communities that they have that they didn't have access to even like 5-6 years ago, because phones are getting a lot more, you know, they're a lot cheaper now for them. And there's a lot more emphasis on getting phones to them. But the other thing too is that's the only place they have access to a community. Because a lot of the stuff, and especially because of COVID, a lot of our access to programming, a lot of our access, like getting these kids out into the community, have kind of been shut down for quite a while. So when we talk about, you know, youth addiction, you know, youth use, youth overdose, youth suicide, things like that, it is on the rise because the kids have nothing to do. There's nothing for them. So they just kind of go into this aspect of languish, like, is this it? Is this all it is?
Yeah, hold on. This reminds me of a question from the chat. Is that what you're coming in with, Jess? So yeah, Katie asked, how do you think technology will affect the next generation?
Oh, do you want to go with that, or you want me to go with that one?
I feel like this would be a funner question to have answered with people from a bunch of different generations, actually, because I think they would have different perspectives. I think my thoughts on that would be that technology, powerful and huge opportunities actually with technology, but I think communication is communication. So I actually don't think technology is super evil. I think it can go wrong, but I also think communication can go wrong in a variety of mediums. And so the rise of technology and kids having access to it, I think equally presents challenges and opportunity. And I think it depends on how you're using it, not just our device is bad or however many hours you spend on it bad. Of course, it's not good to forget to eat food because you're busy chatting to your 600 friends. But I think it's the networks that are then open and available for youth. And since we're clearly talking about high needs youth, their ability to have questions answered, to know where to go, to talk to someone in a way or interface with people that's less pressure. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And I like there's a lot of things that the phone brings to it. Like we were talking, with a lot of the youth, there's a lot of, CPTSD or ADHD, and a lot of the symptomology overlaps. And one thing that happens a lot is they forget to eat, or they forget to do this thing. And the phone kind of almost eliminates that because they literally have it all the time. They're way less likely to lose their phone than their jacket or something else. And so we talk a lot about that's what your phone can do, is set alarms. We can build, better routine, or we don't like to call routines, but more like habit stacking. And so, there's a lot of people who, for like our youth, this thing is kind of a huge bonus. But I agree that there is this slippery slope of oh, what is your group about? And they go, well, I would never tell you what we talk about. And you're like, oh, now what are we looking at in there? There's that dark aspect to it too, right?
Well, it's the opportunity part is that there's a lot of everything. So just, bring back to something more pedestrian. My daughter is really into YouTube. My son is not. So he polices himself. I think there's a whole bunch of other issues going on there, needing to control things, but my daughter loves YouTube. And so, as a mother, I'm just oh, you're on YouTube all the time. Oh my gosh, it's it's a dark hole. There's, once you go to the nether regions, you don't know where you are down there. But she finds cool things too. So I think, she was telling me all these folklore things, or these cool musicians that she's following that do really neat stuff. And so there's a lot of everything.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool things, and then there's a lot of questionable, would not tell your therapist things.
Yeah. There's what's the term? I love the in Bo Burnham special, a little bit of everything all of the time.
Yes.
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 Yeah. I was like, that's good. I like that one a lot. But yeah.
Jessica, did you want to call in for any questions or ask us any of the ones that you had prepared?
I actually opened with my question for you. So you guys did a good job explaining all of that. Is there any other questions out in our webinar for Sarah or Justin or both? So far, I don't see. So I think that was a great conversation. Is there anything you might like to close off with or have us think about moving forward? Oh, sorry, there is a question. Sorry, one more question. As adults, how can we better equip the next generation to take care of their mental health?
First, I would say that adults have to do their own work first. We talk about, I was having this interesting conversation with someone at work yesterday. We were talking about intergenerational trauma, and we really focus on intergenerational trauma in the sense of various other various populations, but the population at large is dealing with intergenerational trauma. And so we have all of these things that we do, Sarah brings up that teacher who's like, well, are you stupid? And I look at that, when I hear that, I go, oh, well, that teacher has some stuff they need to work through. That's a trauma response. That's a visceral, oh, you were not treated properly, therefore you mistreat other people. And so you learn these habits and these skills. And when you look at like how parents are parenting youth or working with youth or anyone who's working with youth, you can tell people who understand the aspects of mental health, how they've been impacted by mental health, and they can check themselves. But you see a lot of people dealing with youth who don't understand their own mental health, their own defense mechanisms, their own things that they do to try to either maintain power. I hear lots of conversations about power struggles, and they don't want to lose power to a kid, but it's like, what's wrong with losing power to a kid? You know, there's nothing more like more powerful and more like ways to build, you know, self-actualization in a youth than to like give them some power every once in a while. And obviously within like realms of safety and things like that. But when we talk about, we have to model what mental health is. When we talk about executive functioning and emotional regulation, those are learned skills. You're not born knowing how to do these things. We have to work on these things. We have to model this behavior. When I'm mad, what do I do when I'm mad? When I'm mad, I do this thing. Actually, you're mad too. I get mad too. Let's have this conversation. I'm going to model what I do. And you do the same thing, or we can talk about things that work with you. And then instead of it being this kind of like split thing, it's more, how do we both work on it together? So we co-regulate first, and then we start working on self-regulation.
This is an interesting, I like all of that, because modeling is exactly what I was going to say. Justin, in the chat, Colin said a lot of, and I learned this kind of more in recent years because I am not a medical professional, but major mental health challenges strike in late teens and early 20s. So how can we share that knowledge with you so that they reach out for help? What I didn't realize, and now, okay, when I'm at a mental health talk, and depending on who's in the room, I always like to preface that there's a spectrum. It's a huge spectrum. And at every point on that spectrum has its own spectrum. So there's, yes, well, I didn't realize that we're talking about diagnosable, chemically complicated things that can happen to people that, interestingly enough, you can have a thing, give it whatever label you want to call it, I'll call it a thing, but then it presents at a certain time. It's like an application within you that launches due to whatever, or simply growing up and, you know, your body saying it's time. And so oftentimes when I talk to parents with like older youth, they say, oh, I had no idea, you know, we didn't know there was anything wrong with so-and-so, or this person, or my child never had challenges, like lots of friends, you know, invited to all the parties, really good grades. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, what is going on here? And so understanding, and this is intergenerational too, because a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, this came from nowhere. And then when you actually start to learn more about the family history, you're like, oh, well, maybe this is a thing that is to some degree genetic, and, you know, it presents differently within different people depending on the person, because it really just depends. But understanding that that's something to look out for, and instead of just reacting to the, I guess, the current trauma of like, oh, my child is not who I thought they were, because that's a loss and that's a grief for a parent, but also realizing, okay, well, irregardless of whose fault this is or like how this happened, it's happening. Yeah. So there are, and knowing that you're not the only one, that your child is not the only one, you're not the only one as a parent. There are lots of every kind of person out there. And so in a way, that's like another mental health like tip of the day, which is being present. And, you know, we can all sit around and project our hopes and dreams and expectations on ourselves, on our perception of our lives and our perception of our children or the youth we work with, or what we think should happen. But at the end of the day, you know, we do have to deal with we don't have to. I think it's prudent to deal with what's actually happening. Mm-hmm. Just not a very satisfying answer, but sometimes you just got to deal with what's actually going on. Like, what do I know that is happening right now? Mm-hmm. Not so angry that this didn't turn out the way I thought.
And I liked that point because we're very quick to go into solution mode, right? Like,
Yeah.
well, we gotta solve this problem. When like a lot of things, it's like, how can we just validate this emotion and feeling and sensation? How do we just comprehend and like come from a place of non-judgment? And we have lots of kids when, they're like, well, I'm really anxious or I'm really nervous or I'm really this. And we keep going like, well, why? And then, okay, well, if you don't like it, then just don't do it. But maybe they really do want to go into that school play and they're just really nervous and they just need a little bit more support. And we just go, I really hear that you're really nervous. What can we do to like make you feel calmed? Like what has worked in the past? Like I'm really here for you. And then again, we're going back to co-regulation. And that's the main driver of this thing. When we talk about things like self-care, it's really interesting to me because we know like the best form of therapy is another person. It's human connection. We know that we've had that research for decades, and we always try to keep putting the emphasis on the individual, but the reality is that the family system has to be the most connected system. That's where we do most of that healing and most of that work.
Well, and hence the mentorship stuff, because yes, in an ideal world, we have these families and there's these different players in our families that surround us, and different people are kind of there for us for different things and for different ages and stages. And we did not even talk about early childhood development today, but like you get to the point where your parents aren't really your person anymore and your friends and your peers are your people, but then based on your initial tethers, you attract certain types of friends, whatever. You have these friends in your lives, and each like teacher, coach, mom, dad, auntie, uncle, brothers, sisters, friends are all different tethers in your community. And so when certain ones fall off, I don't know, death in the family, moving away, whatever, you lose someone. If you have your network of other tethers, it means that you're less likely to free fall,
Yep.
right? And so, I think family and chosen family can come in all sorts of forms, but in the spectrum of mentorship, there's a whole space of natural supports, and in an ideal world, we'd all live in these great neighborhoods where everyone knows your neighbor, and, people look after your babies for you, and you babysit their kids, and, you love your teachers at school. That's wonderful. But there's that natural supportive environment that is like kind of a community mentorship. And then sometimes it just needs to be a formalized mentorship, because you may not have those tethers in your life or those anchors. And so being able to be with a mentor or someone consistent in your life can really help. More is more, but having one means a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We just have one question in the chat from Alex. What do you see as the biggest issue for youth, their mental health stemming from the pandemic, and what we can do to support them?
I feel as though the pandemic, I answered this question the other day. The things that are arising, I don't think are new. I just think the pandemic was like a pressure cooker that accelerated everything. So I don't think just because of COVID, magical, challenging things happened. I think because it was so intense, and because like kids were yo-yoing school, no school, and to be quite frank, like the economic situation, a lot of families have been really challenged, and so lots of family circumstances have changed over the pandemic, which brings forth a bunch of very serious stressors. And so a lot of the times, these stressors in your environment activate all sorts of other things going on. And so in some ways, I think we're being forced to face whatever it was that was already there anyway, but maybe the old ways of like the old tools of kind of maintaining or managing were okay. They're never really okay, but maybe you were getting it done, but now it's the lid's off. So, everybody has to find new ways to get real with resourcing themselves. But I don't think any of it's new.
Yeah, and I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I think it definitely put a microscope on all the things that we're not doing right anymore. And we don't have those distractions. We can't go places, we can't travel, we couldn't do all these things that kind of took away from all these stresses that we were living day to day and that youth were living day to day. And so now we've kind of been highlighted like, hey, this is actually a really big problem. Like, this is the worst, probably, Sarah was talking about it earlier, and I was in agreement. Like, this is the worst that it's ever been. And I don't think it's because of COVID. I think COVID's just kind of been like, this was coming regardless of us. It's just, I think you're right that it just kind of picked it up.
Thank you so much for all your insights and your conversation. If there's any other questions, let me know now. I really appreciate your guys' time, and this was great. If you have anything else you'd like us to put out there, let us know. We can put it on the chat. I can send it out. For now, I would like to thank all the Zoom webinar attendees for coming. And we have more panels happening every day this week. So check them out. I'll put the link here on the chat for Mental Health Week. We have our second one today, and I thought it went really well, and I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we sign off today?
I was going to say, no, Justin, before we go, you should say, what would be your number one call to action?
My number one call to action, there's so many. That's a
I know. You can have more than one, whatever.
That's a loaded one. I think for me right now, my biggest call to action is developing more holistic mental health models in our youth care systems. Transitioning further away from a therapist and more to a holistic team that engages in, and this stuff, it exists. It's been used for a long time. A lot of this is like Dr. Bruce Perry's model of like neuro sequential model of therapy. And so trying to transition to more like holistics, using things like dancing and music and yoga and meditation and sport and all sorts of different things to work through trauma healing, instead of just putting someone in a room for an hour a week and saying like, tell me about your feelings. And so trying to focus on the individual holistically instead of just in a single lens kind of thing. That's my big go-to right now.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yes, the movement piece, that's like a totally different conversation, but I've since learned breath is the ultimate regulator. And one actually does have a lot of control over that. So my takeaway would be, remember that even if you're not, thanks Al, even if you're not a formal mentor matched up with someone that you hang out with and that you consistently show up in their lives, remember that you're an everyday mentor, and that's playing your part to be contributing to that naturally supportive network. And I know this sounds like cheesy, but just for like low-hanging fruit, say hi to people. Invite that. We all know what it looks like to look lonely and to like not fit in. Say hello to that person. Raise up your hand and buddy up with them in class to do the team thing, challenge yourself to come outside of yourself to notice other people. And, I think in the movies and everything, like they talk about standing up to bullying, like it's, because it's like a very triumphant thing to do, but it's really scary to do. And to stand up to bullies is also difficult, because then hurt people. And so bullies are also hurt people. And so standing up to a bully oftentimes hurts. And then situations occur. So finding ways to be part of a collective, to have the integrity to stand up for what you believe in without needing to escalate or be aggressive, right? And, speaking out with your friends and just having honest conversations and being inclusive in even the small ways that I was mentioning, I think goes a long way. Remembering someone's name when you can, and when you ask someone how they're doing, actually care about the answer that they're going to give you. And so you're an everyday mentor, everybody.
Thank you. I think those are really good points, especially with youth, because I really feel what you said, Justin. They don't really necessarily want to sit down and talk about their feelings all the time. So being that model and doing the simple things, I think that definitely can cause a tidal wave. So Thank you for that.
David.
Oh,
Thank you
thank
for having us. Yeah. And thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your insight, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.